Welcome in, everyone, to today's exploration. I am so glad you're joining us because we are diving into, well, a really fascinating set of notes today about ancient languages, translation quirks, and historical texts.
Yeah, it's one of those topics that seems super niche at first, but it just explodes the more you look at it.
Totally. And our mission today is basically to uncover how a single, seemingly ordinary word in the Hebrew Bible completely changes our understanding of ancient history, architecture, and even theology.
Right, because we tend to read ancient texts through a very modern lens.
Mhm.
We just assume their world functioned exactly like ours.
Right, like if you sign a receipt today, your name's just a label verifying you are who you say you are, like a birth certificate.
Exactly. But in the ancient world, a name wasn't just a label. It was, think of it like a heavy gold signet ring pressed into hot wax.
Oh, I like that image.
Yeah, it projected the literal weight of a king's authority. And if we peel back our modern definition of a name, the political and spiritual implications in these historical texts are just staggering.
So let's look at the Hebrew word shem. Because to ancient Israelites, shem meant reputation, authority, renown, and like a memorial.
Right, it carried real weight.
Yeah. And when you read a text like 1 Kings 8, where King Solomon is dedicating the first temple, things get incredibly weird if you only think of a name as a label on a building.
Yeah, it really does.
Because Solomon explicitly says the heavens cannot contain God. But then he repeatedly insists that God has caused his name to dwell in this specific temple.
Which creates this massive theological paradox, right? The text insists the creator of the universe cannot be squeezed into a building made of cedar and stone.
Right.
And yet, there is this localized physical presence claimed in that specific architecture. It's wild.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if a name is authority, it's sort of like planting a flag on a beach. You don't plant it because the literal cloth matters.
No, of course not.
You plant it because everyone understands the declaration, like this belongs to Rome or whoever. So applying that here, the temple functioned more like an embassy.
That's a really good way to frame it.
Right. An embassy isn't the homeland, but it's a localized place where the homeland's authority genuinely operates. But I'm still hung up on the mechanics here.
How so?
Like, God isn't trapped in a cedar building, obviously. So the building is just where his jurisdiction is publicly recognized. Does that solve the paradox?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the embassy analogy holds up perfectly, but we actually have to push it further.
Okay, push it.
In the ancient Near East, temples weren't just diplomatic outposts, and they weren't just residential houses for deities either. They were literal centers of justice and covenant making.
So it was highly functional.
Exactly. The building wasn't needed to shelter God. Placing the shem, the name, on that architecture was a localized declaration of covenant rule to all the surrounding nations.
Okay, so if a temple acts as an embassy, anchoring the king's authority locally, how does an ancient king project that same power into hostile or foreign territory? I mean, without building a new capital city every time.
Well, ancient kings solved this by placing their names on other things, like monuments, conquered lands, official decrees, and even whole cities.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it wasn't about ego, which is what we usually think today. It was a strict legal claim of jurisdiction. To bear the king's name meant you lived under his authority and his protection.
And we see this exact pattern growing in the source text. Like, God's name is placed on individuals first, then upon Israel as a people, then upon Jerusalem, the temple, the kingdom. But wait, I'm stuck on something here.
What's that?
Well, we usually assume the Old Testament gets more narrow and exclusive over time, right? Localized just to Israel.
That is the common modern assumption, yeah.
But then the prophet Amos says the restored house of David will possess the remnant of Edom and all the nations who are called by my name.
Right.
This points in the exact opposite direction. Is this just a contradiction in the text?
It's not a contradiction at all. It's a massive paradigm shift. Amos 9 is forcing the reader to completely rethink how jurisdiction works.
Because of the phrase called by my name.
Exactly. If being called by my name communicates authority and claim, those foreign nations aren't becoming God's property at some point in the future. They already belong to him.
Oh, I see.
The restored kingdom isn't conquering foreign lands. It's entering territory the king already claims as his own.
Wow. So we have this massive paradigm shift of established jurisdiction, but then historically, a translation curveball completely alters the trajectory of that jurisdiction.
Yeah, this is where history gets really messy.
Because when these Hebrew scriptures were later translated into Greek, that specific passage in Amos changed. Instead of David possessing the remnant of Edom, the Greek translation reads, the remnant of humanity seeking the Lord.
It's a staggering change.
From possession to seeking. Empire suddenly sounds like an invitation. Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Did the translators just have a different, worn-out Hebrew manuscript, or were they actively interpreting as they translated?
Well, this raises a huge question about how ancient manuscripts physically functioned. Our sources note that scholars, people like Bauckham, Walton, Heiser, and Alexander, they actually debate this heavily.
Because the words look similar.
Very similar. In Hebrew, the word for Edom, the nation, and Adam, which means mankind or humanity, they look nearly identical, but they were just a vowel shift away from each other.
That is wild. Just a vowel shift.
Yeah. And the exact same thing goes for the verbs possess and seek. So historians of the ancient Near East are split. We don't have absolute certainty on whether a translator was squinting at a decayed Hebrew manuscript that genuinely looked like mankind seeking.
Or if they just decided to make it a theological interpretation for their Greek audience.
Right, exactly. But regardless of the why, the undeniable result is that the prophecy sounded entirely different to Greek readers.
And that specific Greek translation becomes the ultimate legal loophole for the early church, like in Acts 15.
Oh, it is the hinge of everything that follows.
Because they're having this massive heated debate about whether Gentiles have to become Jews to follow the Messiah, and James stands up to settle the argument, and he quotes Amos.
But he quotes the Greek version.
Yes, the Greek version.
And that single quote totally redefines the doorway. The nations don't enter the kingdom through military subjugation or conquest anymore. They come seeking the king.
It's a total flip.
It completely redefines the expansion of this movement. It retains the governmental language, which is why later on, the book of Revelation still talks about kings and nations, citizens, and a new Jerusalem.
Right, but it sheds all the violence of the empires that came before it.
Exactly. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it reminds us that Scripture isn't trying to hide mystical secrets from us. It's just hiding perfectly ordinary meanings behind unfamiliar cultures.
Yeah, that makes so much sense.
When a first-century person heard kingdom, they didn't hear a spiritual metaphor. They heard government. When they heard Lord, they heard a direct political rival to Caesar.
Which is so fascinating. And as a listener, if your brain is wired to obsess over hidden patterns, which is something the author of these notes, Bunny, relates to her own experience with ADHD and autism, this is the ultimate puzzle.
Oh, absolutely. It's all pattern recognition.
Yeah. Recognizing how words like kingdom or name function back then turns a dusty text into this dynamic, interconnected map of meaning across centuries.
It really does reorient how you read the page. You stop looking at English words with modern English definitions and you start looking for the original architecture of the ancient mind.
Which perfectly echoes a quote from the author's grandmother that was included in our sources. She said, "Don't ignore the little things. They're usually holding the big things together."
That is profound.
It really is. Sometimes it isn't a billion-dollar archaeological dig that reshapes history. Sometimes it's just one ordinary little word like name that refuses to behave.
That's a great way to put it.
So, what does this all mean for you listening right now? I want to leave you with a thought from a 6-year-old named Cade, also from our notes. He suggested maybe God kept using the same word because he knew we'd eventually ask what it actually meant.
Out of the mouths of babes.
Seriously. So as you look at the news or as you do your own reading this week, ask yourself what other seemingly simple everyday words are we currently reading through our own modern narrow lenses? What massive claims of authority or incredible invitations are hiding right beneath the surface, just waiting for us to realize that they aren't just labels, but the heavy wax seal of a king?